All right, I think we're live. Oh, you guys gonna man the, there we go. Oh, all right. Well, welcome everyone to Right Hand Technology Group's office hours with an assessor. As always, I'd like to thank Matt Gilbert from Baker Tilly for being with us again. For those of you who haven't been on one of these yet or watched one of these yet, we started these really for our clients so they can get their questions answered from an assessor. We give lots of answers, but we're not assessors, so ultimately our answers, only carry so much weight. So we asked Matt to do this. He was gracious enough to join us. I think we've probably done a dozen of these so far. So yeah, I appreciate it, Matt. You want to introduce yourself and set any ground rules?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Matt Gilbert, partner with Baker Tilly. I've been doing IT and cyber with government contractors approaching 25 years now. When CMMC was getting started, I was there, part of the working groups, coming up with the assessment methodology, was in the first class of assessors trained on doing the methodology. Have been helping folks with CMMC for, a number of years now. So pretty much talk about CMMC, all the time. Happy to answer questions. We'll try to probably keep things more general. And I'll try to kind of talk through how I think about it, because, it might be as illustrative as any of the given details is, how would an assessor attempt to think through or reach a conclusion? Because if you can help us assessors kind of understand and explain your controls the way we tend to think or have to think per the assessment guides, that usually gets you the best outcome. So happy to take whatever questions and get into things.
All right. Well, I guess it's always good to start off with any updates on the rollout. I know we're looking at next month, right, for the official effective date.
Yeah, so November 10th. So CMMC is real. It is 100% happening. Starting November 10th, we should start to see the DoD contracting officers include the 7021 clause in your contracts. When the contracting officer includes that clause, they have to pick what level applies, or what, I guess, level and assessment type. So their choices are level 1 self, level 2 self, level 2 C3PAO, or level 3 DIBCAC. And so, if they specify level 2 self, that would indicate that you have to be compliant with CMMC level 2, and you must enter a self-assessment saying you've implemented all 110 controls, or you could say you've conditionally satisfied level 2, indicating that you have some POAM items. They would have to be items that are eligible for POAM, and or over 80%. So basically a score above 88, or and or kind of POAM eligible items. You would have 180 days under that conditional before you would have to go in and say you have finalized it. So I think there's a lot of confusion among folks who aren't paying close attention to this. That is different than your SPUR score. The SPUR score that we were entering before, you could put in whatever your score was. They didn't hold you accountable. There wasn't they might look at it, maybe ask a question or two. Most times they didn't ask anything, but this is different. This is you saying, I am doing all 110 practices of CMMC level 2, and affirming that you've implemented them all, or affirming you've implemented 109 and you've got one POAM item, and within 180 days you will get that that item fixed. So that's kind of where we're at. If they were to specify level 2 C3 PAO, obviously still have to have all 110 in place. You just have to have a C3 PAO do the assessment, can't do the assessment yourself. So for the first year, the expectation is, so from November 10th through the following year, so November 9th of 2026, we are in what is known as phase 1, and the expectation is that most contracts where you would handle CUI are going to be level 2 self. After that 1 year period, after we enter phase 2, that's where it starts to be more level 2 C3 PAO as the default. So that's kind of where we're at, so it's official. The thing we've been all talking about for 5 years now is finally going to land in people's contracts next month.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of great to reinforce that you're actually supposed to have those in place, because I know the clients who work with us, obviously they're taking it serious enough that they're working with us, but the prospects that we talk to often, I think that self-assessment period is just like more time they got to get ready. So I think there's probably a lot of people out there that are still not as serious as they need to be for, what comes in a month, not even a month.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that it's kind of confusing, the self-assessment of a SPUR score and the self-assessment for CMMC level 2, or I guess sound too similar. Maybe they should have said self-certification or something like that. But they are distinct. They are different. You can't specify like, oh, I'm doing all these things when you're not. If you were to get caught doing that, the DOJ has been, and I suspect will continue to go after companies who knowingly make a false representation like that. So if you knew, oh, I've only implemented half the stuff, but I'm just going to go ahead and certify that I'm level 2. If they can prove that you knew that you only implemented half, but yet still said you were good, you could face some serious fines and penalties, and or lose contracts.
So after next month, if they get a contract that's got the CMMC clause in it, is there typically they basically have to have it entered before the start of the contract? Is that how that works?
You would have to have it entered before the start of the contract. So I have talked with some folks who, I'll just use one. I'll use an example that might help illustrate this. You have to have your assessment entered at the time of award. So just for simplicity's sake, let's say you have it entered on January 1st of 2026. You go enter your thing. On January 2nd, you get awarded a contract. That contracting officer is going to go look you up and say, oh, yeah, they posted they posted their assessment yesterday. They're eligible for award. Now, if you didn't have it in there, I suspect they might send you a note and say, hey, I want to award you this contract, but you don't have a score posted or an assessment posted. And they might give you a chance to rectify that. But I think some of them, it'll be interesting to watch how they proceed. I would imagine contracting officers might want to ask that you have it loaded and disclose that during the bid process, because that's one less thing for them to worry about later, that they want to award to somebody who can't comply with the CMMC requirements. That would be bad. So they might ask for earlier. But the way the rule is written, is that it's at time of award. So as long as you got it in there the day before, or even, the morning of, or something like that, I think you should be fine. What is interesting, and I was talking to one organization, they're like, we've got some POAMs, but they believe that they have implemented all but two things. And for details I'm not going to get into, those two items they think are going to take a little bit of time to get addressed. Well, their plan is not to enter their assessment until they have to. They can enter it as a conditional level 2, meaning, they've got POAMs and their 180-day clock would start. That 180-day clock would start when they've entered the score. So using that hypothetical example before of, if they put it in on November 10th, 180 days starts on November 10th. If they know they're not getting a contract till January 2nd and they put it in on January 1st, well, the 180 days doesn't start until January 1st. I mean, not really buying you much time, but I guess it's a little bit of something. So that's what they're working diligently to get it fixed. They hope they get it fixed, before they have to worry about any of that. But, that was their thought, is they're going to keep tabs on when they think they're going to get a contract and enter it then, not enter it on November 10th. Obviously, if you've got all 110 implemented and you are confident in that, yeah, on November 10th, go put it in there. You're good to go, might as well. Then it becomes a question of, when do you want to incur the cost of hiring a C3 PAO? Because that will eventually come. But if you are, if you're a normal contractor, I think the numbers would say the average contractor is not going to have to be level 2 C3 PAO assessed until second half of 2026, or even kind of fourth calendar quarter of 2026. So I've got some people that are like, yep, I'm good to go. On November 10th, I'm going to put my self assessment in, and I'm good for those. And I'll wait and save my incurring the cost to pay for a C3 PAO until, the second half of 2026. So they're, kind of getting some numbers, putting that into their budgets, but they're not planning to go hire a C3 PAO until the second half of the next year. That's all kind of your prerogative, right? I mean, everybody's got to decide how they want to spend or what they want to do. I've had others take the stance of, well, I'm ready to get certified, so I'm going to go get certified, and I'm going to use that as a marketing tool. That's certainly, another way to go about it too. But I mean, for those folks, they're in the driver's seat because they have all the practices implemented. They feel good about those. The people that have been ignoring this or assuming it would go away and are now still trying to implement stuff, that's the folks who are getting a little bit more stressed out.
Yeah. Yeah, we're actually, I think I might have mentioned it, we're sitting for ours next month. And one thing I noticed just since we've signed up with the C3 PAO is a lot of people are backing out before like their dates come, because we've got offered to jump the line a couple times. We usually get told on Friday, can you go Monday? It's like, well, hold on, we want a little more prep than that. But it got me thinking, like, people are probably the date comes and they're like, oh, they're not, all of a sudden the confidence goes out the window when the rubber hits the road. So I guess walk me through
I
what
think
happens.
that's a frequent occurrence because I hate to say it this way, but you've got executive management and you've got the guys and girls who are actually, doing things. And sometimes the there's a little bit of a gap there that the two don't talk to each other. So the executive management signs up for a date, and the folks who are actually getting things done try to strive for that date, but they realize they're not ready. And finally, before the assessment starts, there's kind of that realization of, oh, I thought we were going to be ready. We're not ready. Okay, maybe we should, reschedule. So
yeah. So it kind of got me thinking, it's probably good for people to know, like, what is the process? You fail, like something is not implemented or they consider not implemented at least adequately, so they can't pass you. Which is it, a full reassessment or?
That is a little bit at the discretion of the C3PAOs. So let me, in theory, let me talk about it academically, and then we can talk about some of the variations in practice. In theory, if you have a practice that is not eligible for POAM, and you have not satisfied the assessment objects, meaning, you're gonna fail that practice. It's not eligible for POAM. So yeah, that's it. At that point, you're gonna have a non-POAM eligible item. That means you can't get conditionally certified. You can't get fully certified either. So you would fail. Theoretically, yes, you would need to start a new assessment. Now, there's nothing that says a C3PAO, there's nothing that specifies how a C3PAO chooses to price things. And if you were to fail and the C3PAO evaluated everything else and was good with everything else but that one thing, you come back 2 months later and say, hey, I fixed that thing, it would be up to that C3PAO. They still have to evaluate everything, but there is presumably some amount of, like, they understood how it worked, they read policies, they did whatever. Presumably there would be some amount of efficiencies, but that would be up to the C3PAO what they want to do from a charging a different amount or charging the full amount. I mean, they still technically have to evaluate all the items. So, they would still have to have work papers and still be able to demonstrate, because the C3PAOs will get inspected to see that they're following the methodology, or they'll lose their, ability to continue being a C3PAO. So they would have to have their work papers and documentation said that they covered everything. But like in that example of, like, hey, some policy I read 2 months ago, they gave me a copy of the policy. It's the exact same version. Nothing's changed. And I read it 2 months ago. I think throw that into your work papers and, mark it off. You probably are okay. But that would be on each C3PAO to figure out how they want to, manage that situation. I mean, certainly, a month or two is a different scenario from, like, oh, a year later I show back up. Like, you really only need to look at the one thing I failed, right? Like, no, a year later, a lot of things could have changed. I think that would be kind of irresponsible if a C3PAO were to be kind of cutting that many corners, if you will. I mean, it's years gone by. I probably wouldn't remember what we read, or anybody wouldn't remember in enough detail. And B, your environment's probably changed. There's different things. There's, you'd want to get fresh examples of stuff. So, it would be very much like a fresh assessment. What a lot of C3PAOs are doing to combat that concern is what is called a readiness assessment. So a C3PAO can do a readiness assessment, which I kind of equate to as like a thumbs up, thumbs down. They can't tell you, they can tell you, hey, this practice failed, but they can't give you any direction or advice on how to fix it, or they would lose their ability to do the official assessment. But so some C3PAOs are doing kind of multiple rounds, if you will. Round one would be, let's do a readiness. If you get through the readiness and they tell you everything's good to go, then you could schedule the official, and then you would go through it all officially and get your results. There'd be, a little bit more confidence going into that official. Some of these C3PAOs are charging the assessment assessment fee twice. So readiness is X and full assessment is Y, but usually it's same number. It's X a second time essentially. Some are kind of in. Some are talking about it from the standpoint of there's some costs associated with filing the assessment, well, registering, filing the assessment, submitting work papers, all that kind of administrative stuff. So some of them are talking about it that like, hey, during the readiness phase, we don't have any of those costs. During the official, we have those costs, but we should be more efficient because we understand how your environment works, and we've already discussed a lot of stuff. So some are kind of saying the two things offset each other. Some are doing fully separate teams, so there's a lot of variance in practice. You might get one readiness team and then a wholly different team show up for the official. You got to just talk to the different C3PAOs and see how they're structuring that if you want to go down that path. But yeah, if back to the original question, if you fail in a non-poemable item, that's that. If it is a poemable item, you would get a conditional certification. The expiration date on that would be 180 days from the assessment. And you would need to fix, that item that's eligible for POAM. You would need to fix it, call your C3PAO back in, and they would flip it from a conditional to a full certification at that point. So you just have to, coordinate that with them. Obviously, if it's like something super minor, like, hey, I'm going to fail you because your policy doesn't define this, and that thing is POAM eligible, I would imagine most C3PAOs are going to extend the assessment a couple days and wait for you to produce a revised version of that instead of coming back 2 weeks later to see the document. But again, that's where mileage will vary with the different C3PAOs. Different people are going to handle it differently. You kind of just need to talk that through with whatever C3PAO or even among the C3PAOs, the lead assessor calls a lot of those shots. So, even at the same C3PAO, if you get lead assessor A and lead assessor B, they might kind of slightly vary on some of that stuff.
And how quickly can you go through an assessment again? So if you fail and you're like, maybe something was misconfigured. I don't know, some of the encryption things that are 5-pointers, and it's just a matter of getting it configured properly.
Yeah, I mean, that just, there's a lot of, that's the kind of classic "it depends" answer. I mean, I suppose there's no specific limit, so you could fail this week and sign back up next week. I don't know. I mean, that's kind of really, it depends. You're also going to have different situations with different assessors of, you know, hey, you failed. Should we just stop? And, you know, like, we've only got through 20 practices. We discovered something that's a fail. It's confirmed. There's no debating it. It's a fail. Do you go through the remaining practices, or do you just stop? Some assessors are going to say, well, I'm going to charge you the full amount. You know, whether you pass or fail, I'm charging you the full amount. And so they'll, at your discretion, you know, I would suggest you probably want to just have them do the rest of the assessment to figure out if there's anything else that were to fail. But some might say, okay, well, if we stop a day in, you know, I'm gonna discount or prorate the price. Again, that's going to be you know, they have to follow the assessment, you know, standards. But there's some wiggle room on topics like that where different assessors can kind of proceed and handle situations differently.
Yeah, sounds like some good questions for when you're interviewing assessors.
You should definitely ask questions like that and try to figure out, you know, how they think it through. I mean, the thing that I would suggest is you're not going to be able to figure out all the questions to ask. And you'll probably annoy a C3PAO if you ask, you know, 75 different questions. But I would ask a couple and see how they respond. And I mean, at least for me, if I were selecting, I would pick somebody who seems fair and reasonable, right? They're not your friend. They're not going to do you a favor, but they also shouldn't be, you know, out to get you or that kind of thing. You got to find somebody who's fair and reasonable. And, you know, you might not ask the exact situation that comes up, but if you get a sense that the person is fair and reasonable to deal with, then when that whatever weird situation comes up, they're probably going to be fair and reasonable in how to handle that situation.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. This came from a client we're doing a scoping project with, and they mentioned, you know, they have consultants and contractors that work with them, kind of on the, it sounds like the engineering side of their business.
Yep.
And they were talking about how, you know, can they get certified? And, you know, I'm thinking off the top of my head, like a solo consultant, that's going to be pretty hard. Or do you see any good solutions for solo? Or have you seen any like solo people get certified or plan on getting certified? Or I was thinking, well, you should probably just treat them like an employee and bring them in your scope and figure out a way to make sure that they don't take CUI out of scope. What's your thoughts?
You stole my answer.
Oh,
That's
okay.
probably the easiest way to do it, right? Is if they are treated more like a 1099, you know, issued a laptop or issued, you know, credentials to your virtual desktop environment or whatever, you know, whatever your structure is, well, then they're not all that different than an employee. I mean, tax and other things are going to be different, but, you know, like from a CMMC perspective, they would need to get trained like your employees. You know, there'd need to be authorization that it's appropriate for them to have access to your environment. You'd need to do, you know, some sort of vetting or most commonly a background check, you know, that kind of stuff. But that would be kind of similar to what an employee would do. So you could pretty much treat them like just another employee and it'd be no big deal. You could treat them like a subcontractor. And if you treat them like a subcontractor, they have to have a cage code. They have to have, you know, a certification or self-assessment on file. So like if you're the prime, you receive a CMMC level 2 self per the 7021 clause. you would be obligated to flow that down to them. And prior to awarding them the contract, you would have to verify that they are level 2 self-assessed. And, so you'd need to ask them to provide you some sort of proof of that. I mean, you could take them at their word, but I think you'd be safer getting them to show you, like a screenshot of what they loaded or what have you. But if they're an individual, it would seem awful onerous for them to be able to achieve that. But theoretically, I guess there's some solo proprietors who have gotten an environment certified or that kind of thing. But it would seem more rare to me. But from a C3PAO assessment, at that point, you like we're assessing the prime. We're not assessing the subcontractor.
Mhm.
So it's none of our business whether they are or aren't. And I'm not. The assessment guide doesn't talk anything about whether or not you are properly flowing down contract clauses or checking those things. I mean, I mention those things because you should be doing them, but during the official assessment, there's no assessment object that says, go determine if the prime has flowed these things down to the sub. That's not part of the CMMC assessment. I will say the DoD will check and is checking those things as part of the contractor purchasing system reviews, the CPSRs, which is a separate thing that procurement folks deal with. So the government is checking that, but it's just not being checked by the C3PAOs. So I mean, from our perspective, if you said, "Oh, that's a sub," okay, fine. It is what it is. So that's probably the safest, easiest way to get there, is to just treat them like a 1099. But
Yeah.
sort of up to you.
Yeah. Well, we've gotten calls from, small to, again, 1, 2, 3, 4 employee companies. It seems like maybe that's even a good recommendation. Just like go to your primes and talk about how you can be part of their scope, or else, I mean, even just the cost of the assessment. I mean, we're small and our cost of our assessments,
it can be material for a small organization, 100%. It's not
counting the practices you need to get put in place and cost of those.
Yeah, I mean, I remember very early on, a nice older gentleman called me, asking. He was explaining. He's like, I used to work for one of the shipbuilders, and I would make these certain propellers that are still in use on a very limited basis for certain ships in the Navy's fleet, and I still make those propellers. I just make them for my home shop. And he's like a little kind of amateurish blacksmith kind of guy shop going on in the back. And he's like, I'm by myself. He's like, I think he said he was 70 something years old. And he's like, they're telling me I got to do this CMMC thing. Like, what's that gonna take? And we talked it through, and he was like, holy moly, he didn't make that much money. This was like a little side hustle for him. So yeah, I think there are going to be people like that out there that are like, this is not feasible. I know I'm working with one large prime that has been surveying their supply chain, trying to find situations like that, and coming up with, like, if that guy is the only person you can get that propeller from, can you set him up with one of your laptops and make that problem go away, kind of thing, or this one prime in particular I'm thinking of, they actually set aside money that they might just start buying up some of the subs, because it's like, I can't not have you, and you can't get compliant on your own, so I'm just going to acquire you. I mean, obviously they'd have to agree to it, but
Yeah.
there's some thought there. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how some of that plays out, but I do think there are going to be some situations where the prime's going to have to. I wouldn't bank on it. I wouldn't that would not be a wise strategy to oh, I'm sure my prime is going to bail me out and make a way for this to all work for me. So I wouldn't count on that, but I'm sure there's going to be some situations where there's some rocket scientist out there and some prime is going to make an exception and do something for that person because they've got some unique skill set, and they're going to set them up as a 1099 instead of a subcontractor or something. The mission's got to go forward, but like I said, I would not be banking on that strategy. That seems pretty dangerous.
Yeah. All right. This is kind of something we hear in our world or in our industry. So this question is, if our MSP provides the tools and does the work, do we need our own version of their documentation, or can we just use their documentation? So, they have a patch policy that they follow for all their clients. Do you just get a copy of theirs, or do you got to have your own?
Yeah. So, this topic comes up all the time. So, I frequently feel like I'm going to this regulation all the time, and so let me pull it up and share, because I think a lot of people need to understand this well. So in the regulation, there is a handy dandy little table that breaks down your ESPs, which stands for external service providers. So acronym soup. If you have a MSP, in the CMMC vernacular, they are technically an external service provider. If that MSP is handling CUI and they are a cloud service provider, FedRAMP kicks in. If they are not a cloud service provider, so this, let's talk about this example of an MSP. Presumably, they're not a cloud service provider. And if they are handling CUI, they need to be the services provided by the MSP or ESP are in the organization seeking assessment scope and shall be assessed as part of the organization's assessment. So to your question, yeah, presumably it's not just the MSP is going to be handing over their policy. Presumably the assessor is going to want to speak to that representative from the MSP who can explain, this is how we do the patching. Here's the policy that we follow for their own gear, but also for the gear that they're patching, at that company. So they would fully be in scope. Even if they're not handling CUI, if they are handling security protection data, so configurations of your systems or logs or data about your systems, if they are not a cloud service provider, but they are handling your security protection data, SPD, then they're still in scope and shall be assessed as part of the security protection assets, right? So if they've got a vulnerability scanning tool that they point at your systems and run to satisfy the requirement for vulnerability scanning, well, that system that they're running is theirs. They're pointing it at the company's devices. Well, that tool is a security protection asset. It needs to be assessed per the requirements. And so they would need to, presumably they would need to be part of the conversation and say, yes, I run this tool and here's how we take care of it and so on and so forth. So is that covered, or is any nuances to it?
Yeah, I guess I'm just kind of thinking, when we're providing, we're getting ready for our assessment. We've been submitting all of our stuff to the C3PAO. and you're providing obviously your policy and then the procedures to back it up and then the evidence. So like if your MSP was doing it, we are an MSP, but like say if you're an OSC that you outsource your IT to an MSP, they have a procedure how they do their patches. Do you have to have your own? Well, you're gonna have your own policy that the MSP is meeting for you, but do you have to have your own version of their procedures, or you just say, hey, send me a copy of your procedure? Again, I guess they'll sit in, but I guess you got to provide the documentation still.
Yeah, you would need to, I mean, you'd have to go through all the different areas and figure out, but presumably there needs to be a meeting of the minds of what is the responsibility of the actual contractor, the OSC, and then their external service provider. So, you know, I would in SSP, like if patching, for example, if we continue on that topic, in the SSP, it should say we have, contracted with blank, fill in the blank MSP who does the patching for us in accordance with their XYZ patching policy. And then the C3PAO is going to want to talk to whoever's doing the patching and presumably get a copy of that policy. And as long as that kind of satisfies the assessment objects, you'd be fine. But you do just have to be careful. There are some people out there trying to say, oh, you don't have to do anything. I'll manage it all for you. That sounds nice and might be vastly oversimplified, because in actuality, there are still some things that you have to do, right? Like the MSP can't decide who's authorized to enter your environment. They might, be the hands on the keyboard that like set up the user, but at the end of the day, they're not going to take responsibility for deciding that, Sally is appropriate to have access to CUI. That needs to be done by the OSC. So you just have to, it has to be very clear what the service provider is doing versus what the company's doing. And there can't be anything that falls through the cracks where it's like the MSP is like, I thought my client was doing that. And the client's like, I thought the MSP was doing that, right? Like that would be a problem.
Yeah. Okay. All right, you ready for some technical questions?
Sure.
It's where we usually have the most fun, right?
Yeah, sure.
And I might open this up to Colby to add some more context, but do you need encryption inside the CUI boundary, for example, between workstations and printers? So I guess, the thought is if, you had visitors and they just plugged into a switch or, port in your conference room, theoretically they could sniff the line and
yeah. All right, let me pull up.
Colby, you can just unmute if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I was thinking mostly about 3.13.16 and 3.13.8, where we have some environments that are enclaves. So we might have some printers and some workstations and maybe a server inside of there. Do we need to encrypt inside that enclave to communicate from a workstation to a printer? Or in other cases where we have internal networks, which are all considered in scope, maybe not everybody has access to CUI, and we have access control and physical protections in place to make sure people can't walk in off the street. But do we still need to have it in those scenarios as well? Or are the physical controls and access controls considered compensating enough?
Yeah, so in the case of 3.13.8, you kind of sort of answered the question for me, so thank you. But the language of the control says implement cryptographic mechanisms to prevent unauthorized disclosure of CUI during transmission unless otherwise protected by alternative physical safeguards. So if I have a local network and it's all behind a secure, secure perimeter, and that secure perimeter is in fact secure, you could be sending CUI across that local network without it being encrypted, because you would be able to say, well, it's protected by alternative physical safeguards. Now, if to the example that Jason was given of, well, you've got people that are allowed to randomly wander around and plug into your ports or jacks in the wall and connect to the network, and you don't have any sort of network access control or anything else that would be preventing them from, if they were to plug in, they could literally sniff the traffic floating by. Well, now you've kind of poked a hole in your alternative physical safeguards. So you'd have to be able to defend that those alternative physical safeguards are in fact functioning. But the way the control is written is, if you have alternative physical safeguards, you don't have to encrypt it. So let me try to think through the scenario of an enclave and a printer. If you have an enclave and you set up a physical room, and that physical room is locked and secured, and you put an endpoint there that establishes a VPN tunnel, and that kind of thing, you're probably good to go. But if that printer traverses your regular network, and the contents is not, the print job's not encrypted, and is traversing your it's traversing outside of your enclave, that gets a little bit more of a probably not okay. I mean, obviously lots of facts and circumstances would kick in to understand, but I mean, in a simplistic sense, as an assessor, I'd be kind of thinking, well, we're probably heading towards an issue because it's not encrypted, and if you don't have physical safeguards, I don't know how you satisfied this control.
Yeah,
does that make sense, or does that answer the question?
It makes sense. I could see the assessors coming in to do your audit, and your IT team's like, oh, let me go. I'll get them set up in the conference room. Here's a switch you guys could plug into. And
well, yeah. More reason why you ought to have a properly secured guest, Wi-Fi environment that's isolated from your regular environment. But I would also suggest, if you have public spaces in your offices, so like a lot of companies I've visited, right, you've usually got like the receptionist, some waiting area, out by the receptionist, and maybe a conference room. That's all kind of like quasi-public space. I don't think I would leave any, if there are network jacks in those locations, I don't think I would leave them connected. Like, I might leave them there because I'm not going to, just leave a hole in the wall. But I might go disconnect those from the switch so that they're not actually a live jack. But then, if you have a guest in the environment, there is a requirement to supervise that guest, or you either have to determine that they're trustworthy by means of, vetting them or background checks or what have you. And then you could potentially give them a non-escorted, guest access to the facility. But if you haven't gone through the trouble of vetting them, then you should not allow them to just be unsupervised, running around, plugging their computers into whatever they want to plug their computers in, right? There should be somebody with them saying, hey, don't do that. And that would address the risk.
All right. Anything else, Colby, on that, or you pretty much answer?
No, I think that gives me a good answer. Thank you.
Sure.
If you have a proprietary software that only runs, just say, on Windows 10, what's the best way to document and defend that in your, basically your preparation for the audit?
Oof. Is that proprietary software used in the performance of the contract?
Let's just say yes. This whole it's all made up. I was just
Okay. All right. Well, per the CMMC scoping guide, let me see if I can get that.
I guess this really could be anything, right? Because sometimes, again, I can kind of think of like a test floor has a computer down there that's gathering the test data, and it can't be, it can't have the auto log off sessions and all those things in place. So you got to somehow exclude it. Like, what's the best way to document those type of things?
I mean, the best way to address it is to let me share. Is to reach a conclusion that it's a specialized asset. So, the categories of specialized assets are government furnished equipment, Internet of Things, operational technology, restricted information systems, test equipment. So, if you have some piece of test equipment that is running on Windows 10, well, then you can call it a specialized asset. And, if it meets these definitions, means hardware and or associated IT components used in the testing of products, then that, that would meet this definition. And then the beauty part of this definition is from a asset description, the organization's requirements, and then the assessor's requirements. They got to talk about it, describe it. You got to document it in the SSP, etc. But during the assessment, the C3PAO is to review the SSP and do not assess against other CMMC security requirements. So, it's running Windows 10. I'm going to ask you questions and make sure I agree that, you determined it to be a specialized asset, and I can get behind the rationale for why you determined it to be a specialized asset. At that point, I'm kind of done talking about it, because do not assess against other CMMC security requirements. So not much I can do.
So you just need to get the thumbs up that it's classified properly, and then that's it.
So some of these, right, like, some of them are a slam dunk, like test equipment, right? Like, I'm running this thing to test the pressure. One company I worked with made valves for the Navy. They had test equipment to test, that the valve didn't break under certain pressures and temperatures and stuff like that. It was clearly test equipment, right? Like, there's no debating. It's sitting there in the test lab, and it's a piece of equipment that measures the whatever, and it was running, some piece of software that was limited in certain abilities to implement the requirements. It clearly was test equipment. Now I have one guy, he's like, well, I'm just going to put that other computer in the test lab and we'll call it test equipment. Well, I don't know that, maybe you sneak it by the assessor, but if they're paying attention, I don't think that's going to fly. That's not test equipment. You just parked it in the testing lab, but it's still a regular device. I don't know that you get away with that. So, you got to be able to defend it. But yes, that's probably the safest, easiest path, is to conclude that it is a specialized asset. if it's proprietary stuff and it's not used in handling, it's not used in handling CUI, I would endeavor to physically or logically separate it so that you could call it out of scope. I mean, that'd be kind of the next easiest. And then anything, and then I guess if it's like still on your network, and it would be, so you couldn't physically or logically separate it, and it doesn't, that piece of gear doesn't have CUI on it, it's a contractor risk managed asset, a little bit less. From an assessor's perspective, all we're supposed to do is limited checks. But if it's got CUI on it and you can't convince an assessor it's a specialized asset, you're probably, if you can't implement the practices, you're probably ending up with a POAM or potentially a failure for that practice or multiple practices.
Yeah, this might be, we only got a couple minutes left, so this might
Sure.
might not be something that you can answer quickly, but yeah, we were having this conversation internally about, if you stay on Microsoft Commercial, you get, you set up things so that, we're not taking CUI on Microsoft 365 Commercial. We got incident response plans. We basically meet all the requirements. The concern being, if you are CMMC certified, that all of a sudden other people just assume you can take CUI and start sending it to you. So like if somebody stayed on commercial and then somebody they work with is like, oh, they're CMMC certified, and they just start.
I mean, it would be your obligation to communicate. If somebody sent you something you're not capable of protecting, it would be your obligation to let them know that they shouldn't have sent it to you. You can't protect it, and they, in turn, should then be treating that like it was an incident, because technically it was an incident. They had a disclosure of CUI to someone who couldn't protect it. That is a problem. I mean, the same would hold true for, ABC company chooses to employ an enclave strategy. So they've got abccompany.com email addresses, but if they're going to handle CUI, they've got, abccompanyfederal.com, and that's set up separately and got its whole thing. Well, just because that federal enclave is authorized, if the customer accidentally sends it to the commercial side, the abccompany.com, that's a incident, right? Because they just shared CUI to somebody who's not capable of handling CUI. I mean, that's, so that kind of stuff can come up. It is important that the prime understands what the sub is capable of. What I'm more worried about is, honestly, within the company, oh, we're CMMC certified for this little enclave here, but the marketing guy is going to tell everybody, oh, we're CMMC certified for everything. We're good to go. And then they're going to start signing up for contracts that are using everything outside of the enclave. You're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble if that occurs. So, the enclave strategy is not without, it's a great strategy, but you have to manage how it's being referenced or disclosed, because you have to keep the CUI in the bounds of that enclave that you declared. You can't let it start spilling all over the rest of the environment. You got to keep it in the enclave. And every time it comes out of that enclave, if it spills into the unsecure part of the environment, that's an incident. You got to report it.
So in the instance, that I was describing, we get CMMC certified, and all of a sudden, a client's like, well, they're CMMC certified, just send them CUI, we'll obviously tell them not to, but whose incident and who has to report it? Is it our incident?
The person who was the original holder should be the one that reported it.
So if they emailed us and we weren't able to protect it, that's on them as their incident.
That would be, I mean, I'm not a lawyer. Don't,
Yeah.
you know, obviously probably consult a lawyer, but yeah, the person who holds the CUI has responsibility to exercise due care and only share the CUI with somebody who's capable of protecting it. So if they sent it to you without knowing that, it's their fault. Now, if they said, "Hey, Jason, can I send you this CUI?" and you said, "Oh yeah, sure, go ahead." Well, then now it probably is your incident because you told them it was fine.
Yeah. All right. Oh, sorry, I ran out.
I know we're right on
here.
time, so
Yeah.
we got to wrap up.
Anything you want to share or anything coming up? Besides
No,
November 10th?
just if you need us or would like to talk further, bakertilly.com/CMMC.
I appreciate it, Matt. Have a good day.
Yep. Thanks all. See ya.
Bye.